Good afternoon. It's wonderful to be here, and it's a really big honor. I want to thank you for all the work you've done putting this together. These projects are going to be amazing by the time we're finished. I actually usually am on the other side of this issue with games. For the last 15 years, I've been studying games, making games, looking at game makers, advising on policy, building non-for-profits, all around the ways in which play is fundamental to learning, and games as a subset that's digitally mediated can actually, with the right audiences, be very powerful in terms of learning. But something has really changed in the last about 8 to 10 years in media. And of course, games are not the only place we're seeing these changes, but they're the place I care about because it's my area of expertise. And I typically study adolescents, which are 13 to 25. Sorry, undergrads, that includes you. But neurally, adolescence is 13 to 25, so that includes our undergraduates who's, for example, all the students in our game design program that I happen to have the honor of chairing. And what we've really seen now is that 98% of players online report that they have positive experiences, and that's great. So wonderful, we have research that actually documents this. The problem is now that you see 83% actually also experience hate and harassment. What is going on in our game spaces? And for a campus like ours, where games play, dare I argue, a really big part of our campus identity among young people, it feels really important that we not only understand what's happening in these spaces, but use campuses as a leverage point to change things. And I think we can get there. So we started by doing this large lit review, found about 90, 95 articles. What's interesting here is that there was very little empirical work, which says that we have some work to do to get the details right, because I can tell you, when you build programs, you need to know the mechanisms by which people are being radicalized in these spaces if you want to create off-ramps so that they can actually step down from it, which is my ultimate goal. But we did this large lit review, and as I said, there wasn't a lot of empirical data, but there were a lot of very detailed case studies. And that literature actually converges on one single kind of causal model of what's going on in games. Why would extremists come to see games as game players as their army, the boots on the ground, as you'll hear people on Breitbart say? And on the other hand, why are games such a ripe space for this to be happening, right? Well, here's your model. As you might have noticed through all the controversies of the last years, we have a massive lack of diversity in the industry. So the games that get made all privilege the white male gamer. All you have to do is pick up a game, and what you'll see is that it's very easy to play a white male. It's very difficult to play any other body, any other ethnicity, any other identity. What this really creates in these worlds is what I would consider misogyny at the very root of it. Oftentimes, extremism writ large in America is deeply rooted in anti-Semitism. In video games, it takes a different tack. It's rooted in a kind of misogyny, but it is definitely expansive from there. You have this way in which the so-called red pilling, or the way in which what others have called the manosphere, blogs, forums, and other community sites online of men that feel disenfranchised by women asking, in some cases, dare I say, demanding that we have the same rights as any other human being, has led to this kind of growing in-grouping where there are groups online that believe that they have been harmed and mistreated by women wanting to basically be treated like humans and represented by like normal people. And this all came to a head somewhere around 2014 in an event we call Gamergate, which was really just a thinly veiled attack on women's critique of games and other people's critique of games. That was sort of done under the rubric of ethics and journalism. It had nothing to do with ethics. It had nothing to do with journalism. And why this event is so important is that that event was sort of co-opted by the Breitbart right. And essentially what you saw as a minor kind of behavior in games, trolling, doxing, swatting, all of these terrifying terms that we use now, gamers essentially exported their cultural practices to the alt-right. And now, essentially, you see those ill behaviors in games that used to be a minority kind of problem in game spaces are basically now the handbook for how to harass and run hate campaigns. In games, they're literally called hate raids against your opponents, which in this case happens to be anybody that's not basically white, cisgender, or male, online. So you have this deep conflation, this kind of weaponizing, I would say, of gamer populations. What's more is that you have anecdotes, case studies, investigative journalism stories talking about how extremists are now recruiting from our game spaces youth to get involved in these kinds of things. So if there's one thing we ought to do is figure out how to stop it and how to actually de-escalate the work. In essence, it's no surprise to most of us who've been paying attention to the media that in fact mainstream games oftentimes kind of sell white supremacy, I would argue. All you have to do is look at the role of women, people of color, people who are not straight, and you'll see that there are oftentimes resources, characters to shoot, but rarely characters to interact with, or let alone play. So what do? Well, part of this project that we're working on is trying to address this. So we did this literature review that let us identify some of the key scholars that are specifically working on online interactive media and extremism. From there, we're doing an academic summit on June 14th, where we're bringing everyone to campus, and those who can't join are going to join by remote, by Zoom. Oh, Zoom. Every time I say that, I go, ugh. But we will, and we're trying to get together to create an action plan, because all of us are scholars on campuses that have large populations of gamers. As part of that, too, though, we're trying to put in some empirical work to understand what exactly is this cycle of hostility and hate that we're seeing in online games. So we're doing a toxicity and extremism survey among young people now. We're about 2/3 of the way through our data collection, so if I look tired, now you know why. We're oversampling UCI students so we can describe exactly what's happening specific on our campus. And from there, we'll do follow-up interviews, especially the perpetrators. I want to understand, I guess I should just admit, because I work with kids, and oftentimes I work with the so-called at-risk kids, I don't believe anyone's incorrigible. I don't believe there's anyone that can't actually change. I should know. I'm from Missouri. Oh, my God. I shouldn't have said that. My father won't be proud of me saying that. But I want to be able to build off-ramps for kids. So in order to do that, we've got to get into understanding what this cycle of hostile behaviors is. But our final goal is actually to get to an actionable campus plan. Universities have this fundamental role in changing the future generations. So our campus, because we're so games heavy, I think that we're really well positioned, thanks to your Office of Inclusive Excellence and all of the work that you're doing, to actually bend the arc when it comes to games and game designers. Thank you, that's all I got.